everyone, and welcome to Tuesday Masters, which used to be Monday Masters. But hey, times are changing and there are new faces coming every year. We talk about all these fantastic Indian players, but one of the biggest talents is sort of left out, often left out, because he's not quite from India. He is actually from Uzbekistan. Now, the good thing is for Uzbeki chess, they have plenty of legendary players, among them Kashimdzhanov, who was a world champion, and of course the second for Vishy Anand. So there is an Indian connection, but when we talk about Abdusattorov Nodirbek, well, he is from Uzbekistan. Now, this Tata Steel again showed why classical chess needs to make a big comeback. I hope that this year we're going to see many, many more. They actually had a tiebreaker which was played between Prague and Gukesh, which was great, although the tiebreak system, I think, could be fixed. They could actually have a final game, so the last game, the sudden death, that could be a rapid game, and then just reverse it, just have the blitz after deciding who is the favorite. That would probably make a much more exciting viewing and a higher quality, because that match was very good, but the last game was sort of underwhelming. I mean, it was thrilling, but thrilling if you like lots of mistakes and not so much chess mistakes. Anyways, back to this game. This was played in Tata Steel. The title of this lecture is Art of Urgency. Now, by urgency, I don't really mean the urgency to play aggressive moves. It's going to be more of an urgency to fix issues and fix small strategic problems that you're facing. So let's get into it. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. Somewhat surprising, I've seen the Dutch people venture and play the Scotch, but Max goes for bishop b5, a6, and this again shows the new era of players. These young and upcoming players, they're not playing for a draw. Before, everybody in their grandma would go knight f6 and beg for a draw. Not these folks. They're trying to win. So they're playing the classic line, knight f6, d3. And d3 actually has multiple ideas behind it. It avoids the open variation, which of course is very topical these days and played by Nodirbek a lot of the times. Also, you may actually get into the main line of the Marshall, but that's a topic for a different day. So d3, bishop c5, black gets the chance to put the bishop there. Of course, the pawn can't really be taken because of this neat little trick for black. You double attack on f2 and on e5. Therefore, nobody plays it that way. c3, controlling the d4 square, also giving a square for the bishop. d6, castles, castles, h3. And this is sort of our starting point where I'd be asking y'all the big question. Strategically, what should black do here? What do you think would be a good idea? Can I ask someone to close the door, please? Thank you. So, if you're familiar with all of these semi-Italian type of positions, this is sort of, somewhat tedious because you've seen it before a million times. However, if not, or even if so, what would you do as black? What would be your first thought?
H6 is center bishop.
H6, definitely a reasonable move, stopping any of these ideas of pinning black. This is actually a very typical move in these type of Spanish positions where you stop these type of ideas. However, what Nodirbek does is actually allowing it. Goes bishop a7. Now, bishop g5 doesn't necessarily mean it's a win. Oftentimes, you get into these type of positions where black does give a concession of actually creating weaknesses. However, that bishop is dead on g3. It can never really go anywhere. And apart from being a defensive piece, that's all it really does. Now, often people go g4, just get trigger happy, but that's when the perpetrator returns, and then you cry. Because, yes, black can defend it, but then you can't move ever again. So, just trust me, bro. Black is busted. Anyways, bishop g5 wasn't played, and I'm not saying that, of course, that's not playable for either side. It's obviously a complicated game, but there are some downsides to that. Mux actually just goes rook e1. Now, before I move over to the next question here, bishop a7 has the point that eventually white might want to go d4. Just get that pawn, double pawns in the middle of the board, just to get a majority. And that would have been a tempo. Therefore, he goes bishop a7. So whenever white goes d4, he gets to react whichever way he sees fit. Rook e1. Now, these positions, what makes these positions difficult is that often you just don't know what to do. Or you haven't decided what to do yet. So if we think about it from a logical way, which side of the board will black most likely play on?
King side. I want to put my knight on e7 and g6.
Yes. So it's sort of yes and no. You want to play on the king side, but you sort of bring the knight over so you clear the path for your pawns. Yeah. And the upside of going knight e7, and that was also Edridge's idea as well, is that you're actually not telling your opponent what you're going to do. You may expand on the queen side, but you may as well attack on the king side if there comes a chance. So knight e7 is a very, very strong maneuver, very typical too. And you see this quite often. Black regroups. And the main point being is that you bolster that e5 pawn. You would move this knight just about everywhere, and they actually have put this knight, this poor horsey, everywhere, but then it wouldn't protect the pawn. So d4, knight g6, bishop c2.
You should mention one point. Before they put the bishop on a7, this knight e7 didn't work because of d4, because then you can't hold the center. So if you play knight e7 here, then d4, and black can't hold the center.
Yep. That's a very good point by Doug. Here you can't really do this exactly because your bishop is still in the way, and the moment you do it, you already have trouble with the e5 pawn. So therefore, you do prophylaxis, and actually these kids are really good at that. And in fact, I would venture as far, when it comes to strategic chess, I think Nodirbek is probably one of the strongest. The better fighters for the moment is Gukesh and Pragnananda. But when it comes to strategy, I think Nodirbek is a slight favorite compared to his rivals. So rook e1, knight e7, knight g6, over protecting the pawn, bishop c2. Now, all these moves that we are making, we're trying to make sense of it, but of course this is still preparation for both sides. This is all well known, for them at least, and it's all very logical. White moves the bishop around, but actually protects an incredibly important pawn on e4. So for a good cause, you may as well waste the tempo. So bishop d7, bishop e3, rook e8, all very standard, overprotecting the pawn. Also a slight bit trying to pressure the e4 pawn. If black gets the chance to capture, let's say white does something silly, black would consider capturing here, because when you capture with the pawn, well, already I have two attackers, only one defender. This bishop is in the way. I can take here, and the usual trick of double attacking doesn't really work. There's about a million ways I could solve this, but check should be the easiest, and I just move my queen. And I'm up a pawn, and white might have some superfluous compensation, but probably not even that. So rook e8, knight d2. Now, this is actually a moment, and there always comes a moment where you have to sort of figure out what you're going to do. So this is a critical position, and I'd like y'all to try your hand at it. Try to figure out an idea. Try to figure out a move that you'd fancy here. Now, first and foremost, white is a little bit better, and that's actually typical of these positions. White is a little bit better because it has two pawns in the middle, black has only one. And this pawn is there to support. I often hear the suggestion d5, but when your opponent is the one landing the blows, a counterpunch is very risky because you're the weaker side, you're on the defense. So, in fact, Nodirbek is not really playing aggressively yet. There's no reason for him to take over because white just has too much control. So we got b5. I really like that move. That's a typical way of getting into a Spanish type of position. And I'm going to add something extra, hopefully for a knowledge that you already know, that the Spanish structure is supposed to be bad. It's supposed to be a target. However, look at it from a different perspective. Black, let's say, again, white goes here, black can eventually gain space on the queen side, so that liability actually can suddenly become a strength. Like even here, black can slowly consider crossing the demarcation line and sort of gaining space, and suddenly it's a fight. Now, of course, if trades, notice that there is only slight reasons for white to claim any sort of advantage is maybe because of those pawns somewhat weak, but in the center, it's dead equality. So in fact, black actually gets some fighting chances in that case. So I really like b5. c6 I'm not a big fan of. Your bishop has really little space left. If you go c6, even that little space is just gone. And not to mention the d6 square that was just defended is no longer having enough protection. So, one down, but one up. You're doing good. Any other move suggestions? b5 wasn't played, but I actually consider it a viable option. It's definitely a move that you could consider here. Now what Abdu did is more about understanding what white wants to do. And it's more of like restricting than anything else. And if you've seen many of these newfound Italian plays, you'd actually kind of notice what white is going to play for. Now, white is going to play obviously on the queen side, because black is just too well guarded on the king side. It is very logical to play on the other side in that case. So black is sort of intending, white is sort of intending to expand with b4 and a4. How could we potentially deal with that idea? So there is a suggestion of c5. Do we love c5? You guys are really quiet. I want to hear a yay or nay, a loud one. Nay? That was a very despondent nay.
Because I looked at C5.
Okay. So why the hate for c5? It definitely destroys all hopes for freedom for that bishop. But it's a close position, so that's not really the biggest problem. The d6, still the same thing, the same old drill, that d6 pawn is going to be loose. There's a difference between that d4 pawn being on d5 or here. White still has the chance to eventually open it up, like trade, and get in there. Notice that that b5 push didn't happen yet. So white can actually exploit those. So c5 would try to restrict white's play. Well, what else could we do? a5, yes. Oh. a5. And I really, really like this move by Nodirbek. He stops any sort of these expansions. Anytime they would do so, we would just snap take that. And in that case, white sort of loses that grip in the center. Of course, with many trades to follow, it's still a game, but black is getting happier. a4, bishop c6, solid move, putting pressure on e4. In fact, setting up ideas of taking with the same idea that you can't take back with the pawn because it's going to be hanging. Now, yes?
Can I interject one
yes.
here too?
Yeah.
In my first round game in the Austin IM tournament I played a couple weeks ago, you take a5 and a4 off the board, bishop d7, and I didn't understand this, but I had more or less this position, except the bishop was on c1, but I played b5, a5, and what I didn't understand in this setup was after I played c5, white played d5, and I played c4, the actual correct setup for black is to put the a pawn on a4 and close the queen side, and I didn't realize that, because white's only plays on the queen side, and then in this structure right here, black is actually better on the king side, and the computer evaluated me at like plus 1.25 if I close the queen side with c5, c4, a5, a4.
c5, c4, a4, or just a4?
You need both. You need the pawns on c4 and a4.
So yeah, let me just put everyone up to speed. So let me just get a position.
Right.
We're sort of talking about a position like this.
Right. White would play knight f1.
Yeah.
Play c4, knight g3.
Yeah.
And then after knight g3, you play a4.
a4. Yeah.
And I didn't do this because I thought, well, white's just going to play a3, and I can't do anything on the queen side. The computer's just like, yeah, black's better here.
Yeah, so what Doug is saying is that he just played this game and computer suggested that you should close it down for black on the queen side, because that's where white's supposed to play, and then black is just much, much better on the king side. And I tend to believe that because these knights are somewhat more restricted. Anytime white goes for knight f5s, black will eventually move around. Like, just let me give you a couple of moves. Oftentimes, black will just go move the knight away and just kick the knight out. Now, of course, you have to tread carefully with all these tricks. Let me just put a more standard position here, but black can go something like knight f8, g6, and eventually black starts to have almost like a King's Indian type of position, minus the terrible dark squared bishop that she always has. So this is sort of like a much better version of that.
Right. And what I didn't understand was I didn't push my pawn to a4 and allowed white to kick, the pawn with a4, and all of a sudden I had weaknesses on the queen side to deal with, and then white could also build on the king side, and I was worse.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a really subtle difference in this position, but now that I know it, the pawn's going c4 and a4 in these types of positions.
Yeah. So obviously, and that's sort of the beauty of these positions, it's all about the nuance. You miss an idea, you get toasted immediately.
And I did.
But once you kind of capture the concepts, that's when you start really shining in these positions. But it takes a lot of time. And I actually like this game because it sort of models something very similar as what you mentioned. So bishop c6, if d5, yes, white has the space, but black gets a free hand on the king side, and it is actually a fairly comfortable play. Again, notice that in most of these close positions, which is a King's Indian, like, black actually has almost like a perfect defense. It's very, very difficult to break through because this pawn actually been moved too many times. It's supposed to be here, so it supports a b4 break. Here, white is just slowed down. So queen b1, this is a very strange looking move, but it is actually completely sound. The idea is if captures, white wants to capture with the c pawn. So in that case, that e4 pawn is protected, and white staunchly keeps that bishop on e3. Now, if you'd be saying, well, wait a minute, Denes, why don't I just move my bishop? Well, this bishop is sort of the key and a soul of white's position as well. This bishop will never have a counterpart there, so either black is going to start piling really hard on d4, or if you move the pawn, that's going to be the problem. Not to mention, with that bishop gone, I have a wonderful outpost on f4. This is a very, very pleasant position for black. So queen b1 looks strange, but actually is fairly logical. Queen e7, very logical. You're actually connecting them rooks. D takes, bishop takes, rook takes, bishop d3. So we reached a position that's fairly standard, but this is actually when your chess game starts. Most everybody thinks, oh, opening ends, game ends, hooray, we all go home. Well, in the 90s, often that's what happened. They all felt like, oh my goodness, it's recess time. We make draw, we leave. Not anymore, because this is just when it begins. For some, it ends, but for Nodirbek, it begins. So, just at first blink, you could guess that black is not doing badly. Black has the fair share control in the center, fair share control on the side of the board. So black does not need to get too worried, at least just yet. So, as I said earlier, this will be mostly a maneuvering game, mostly about finding strategies. And with every new position, there comes some new challenges. What do you think would be our biggest challenge now? What should be our goal? for black. Whoever says checkmate, you get banned in Twitch. You won't get banned live, no. Probably Ben Simon will look at you sternly. He refuses to. Sad times.
The output you were talking about on F4 is really enticing now. Bishops are traded off.
Okay, but if you go here, well, if I'm a scaredy cat, I go back to F1. If I'm feeling optimistic and I want to play theme tournaments, just like the one we're going to have on February 13th, hosted by GM in Res Tata Abrahamian. It's going to be an Italian night. I am going to be co-lecturing, followed by a tournament. We're going to discuss the ins and outs of the Italian. Just so we're on topic, I immediately recognize that, that is the Italian bishop. And by the way, if you come live and win, you get to win a book prize on that said topic. So you can enrich yourself and get to know even more about the Italian. Starts at 5:30 p.m. Now, after this commercial break, Bishop F1 is also, it is more of like the Kamsky move. I don't think we kind of use this lingo. I don't think anyone used it before, but it feels Kamsky through and through. Make sure the bishops are safe. We need a pair of those for the ending. And then if you follow any of Kamsky's games, that's sort of the death spell for the opponent. They lose out. It's actually a very, very strong idea because it overprotects all of the important squares on G2 and H3. And then your knight sort of starts to feel a little stupid. It doesn't really do it. It doesn't really do that much.
Yeah, I mean, my first thought is that rook's misplaced on A7, so I probably want to bring it back to the game. My only, and I don't think I mind if white plays bishop b5, so I don't think I need to worry about preserving the bishop.
So you don't really mind about bishop b5?
I don't think. That would be my only other concern is whether I should consider bishop d7 to play c6. But I don't know that that's a strategic threat.
So you're wondering whether this is a big idea, and that's
I don't think it is, but it's something to think about.
Okay, so Doug actually has an important point that he's making. He's actively looking for white's plans. Whenever we go knight f4, we sort of become this hooray optimistic blitz player that we're going to checkmate our opponent. Now, of course, it's good to be optimistic, but it's more of like, it's not strategic by nature. That's sort of the gist that I wanted to say there. But again, let's go back and let's actually think about this. So if we're suddenly thinking of what white will want to do, what do you think, apart from bishop b5, what ideas they might have in mind? Because that's actually a very good line of thinking, sort of wondering about game plans for your opponent. I'll give you one. Knight c4 is something that comes to my mind. Why? Well, they're trying to bully our pawn on e5. Right? That's a very reasonable, strong move. Is it like outrageous? Are we losing? No, we're not losing. But our knight on g6 will never be able to move there. It's going to get rooted. It won't be able to move. It's just going to get rooted. Somebody said that wouldn't it be more appropriate to give the losers a themed book? Well, they can borrow it from the winners. That's how you make friends, you know. So knight c4, any other ideas? Well, white's supposed to play on the queen side, right? How else could white do that?
Play b4.
Yes, exactly. So b4 is also an idea. Right now, it doesn't really work because I capture, and I already have two pieces lined at your pawn. So again, notice that black's position is working because white can't really do their plans. So bishop d7 is interesting. What Nodirbek decided to do is not rook a8, but knight f8. Knight f8, and he probably thought that if he's going to go knight c4, I'm going to get stuck. So he's doing this maneuver before he would get stuck there forever. Knight c4, knight d7. And at first blink, for the uninitiated, you'd be like, okay, you maneuvered your knight, so what? What's the big deal? Well, do you think this knight is going to stay here forever? Nuh-uh. This knight actually wants to go here. And if you ever seen a Kasparov game, you know the final destination. It's going to be f5. And if you don't do something about it, you're going to be in a world of hurt. But luckily for us, we have g6 in that case, right? There's no way for you to stop me from going there, and this maneuver and this plan of planting a knight is out the window. Knight d7, knight e3, and then g6. Now, look at this position for a second and wonder, okay, so we stop all the plans for white. For now, let's shift gears. What would be our plan currently? Or something that we could try to play for?
Well, you can start to pile up on the e4 pawn, right? Something like
Yeah.
c5.
Very good. Knight c5. And you're not only piling there, by the way. This is the best thing in chess. When you actually start piling on everything. You pile on the bishop, you pile on the pawn, and you pile on the e-pawn. So at this moment already, black might actually be slightly better because black is the one calling the shots here. With white's pieces mostly misplaced. Like this knight is practically just an onlooker. It doesn't really do anything. Knight h4, knight f5, those ideas work in different types of Spanish positions, but in order to win an attacking game, you have to have pieces to checkmate with. And with this queen on vacation on b1, it's very unlikely that's going to provide you enough attacking chances. So knight d7, queen c2, a very sound move by Max Warmerdam. Again, connecting dots. g6. And I actually like this play by Abdu. He's practically saying, okay, I'm just plucking all these holes so you can never enter. I have time. Where are we rushing? b3, b6, rook d1. So let's keep it with the same idea in mind. We're not rushing anywhere. What move would come to your mind that's a slow move but has a little bit of an urgency to it? They kind of realizes, well, wait a minute. Is this really doing something here? Doing anything at all? h6, h6 is definitely a slow move, but I'm a little bit wary of starting to move all my pawns when you're kind of creating an unforced error, creating a target in front of your king. You could go knight h5. I see nothing wrong with that. Rook a8. Obviously, you always have to look around. There's always a priority list. Is there a big problem brewing? Well, there was. Our knight was about to get stuck on g6. So that's why he maneuvered the knight to d7. And now, coast is clear. What the heck is that rook doing there? Let's move it to a8, back to our family. Queen b2, now knight h5. Knight e3. Rook d8, all fairly sensible stuff. Bishop c2, knight f6. Now, knight f6, I would give props for this move. By now, I think it'd be a bit much to say that one side is much better than the other. I'd say it's sort of balanced. And sometimes you actually reach these positions and you want to sort of force your will on the position. And that's what people do most of the time, like at beginners at least. That they go, I've been outplaying my opponent, I'm going to go raw knight f4. But the thing with knight f4 is the same thing when someone suggested going knight h4 and sacrificing. You have to have enough pieces to win the game with. The knight on f4 is incredibly pretty, but white actually has enough pieces around. It's like 2-to-1 advantage, like two pieces guarding, only one aggressive piece there. And it's not going to be enough. So I actually like what Nodirbek does, says, okay, I'm just going to keep the position. Very Karpovian chess in that sense that they're not doing anything spectacular, just keeping pressure on the e-pawn, not rushing to attack when there's not enough ways or chances. Just going back, waiting for a better opportunity to come. Well, if you go here, you can go here. Yes, you can, but there aren't really any good squares. You don't, this knight on e3 isn't as great as it looks at first blink. This knight would be great if it would have landed on f5 or in the future on d5. But it looks pretty, but it's much worse than it looks. So knight c4, king g7. So black is still holding the balance. So whenever we're claiming, well, what are we doing as black? Well, we're holding firm. b4. And here comes the big question, because Max is getting ambitious. How should we react to this pressure on the a-pawn? Because now white is probing. They're probing and prodding, and seeing if they can get some chances.
Can we now make a pawn cube?
How? What?
B5, pawn cube.
Okay, it's a beautiful pawn cube, but they just sneak our a-pawn away. So it'd be nice, but they just take our pawns. The same issue with takes here. White again gets a good spot for the knight, because it is supported by the pawn, and these squares become loose, not to mention that the b-pawn is becoming a target. The key of this part of the game, holding firm. Rook a8. So looking awful at first, but what black is sort of saying, if you trade, well, my knight is going to go to c5 and start hitting your pawns. So it's not that white is the only side having all the fun. And rook a8 is just a miserable move only on paper because it has a purpose. It has a purpose of indirectly threatening to capture on b4 and targeting the a4 pawn. Rook a1, h6. I like rook a1. Both of them are very steady, good moves from both sides. Rook e3. And rook e3 is sort of starting to get a little mysterious. Yet to figure out what's the point. Knight h7, hinting at knight g5. Now, oftentimes there are ghost threats and ghost ideas that some of these players are going for. Are we certain that Nodirbek is going to go knight g5? No, but it's definitely on the table. And I mean, again, talking about typical King's Indian ideas, this is actually not at all ridiculous. Black often would go knight f6 and start using that pawn as a battering ram against that weak h3 pawn. So this is actually an idea that's on his mind. So knight d2, rook a7, rook e1. And again, this is sort of a couple of waiting moves from Warmerdam, but I'm not sure they're helping his position a lot. Knight g5, knight e3. Finally, the knight goes back where it belongs. Knight f6, again, taking away that key square. b5, bishop b7. A question. Was b5 in favor of white? Or was it in favor for black? Black, why?
It released the tension, and now I have the c5 square, which is going to be stronger than the c4 square, because I can oppose a knight with my bishop by putting it on e6, and you're not getting rid of my knight on c5, which always hits the a4 pawn.
Exactly. So black is gaining control of the c5 square. It might not be a big deal right now, but in 3, 4, 5 moves, it's going to be apparent that it's an important square. And I can't always pester your knight, as Doug pointed out correctly, and you can do nothing about my pieces. c4. Now, Warmerdam is sort of claiming chess is concrete. I don't care about your future plans. They're right here, right now. Deal with my knight d5. And Nodirbek says, fine, I don't care. He goes knight d5. Okay, I promised you knight d5. I'll play knight d5. So the big question is, was Max Warmerdam correct? Or was Nodirbek correct? Kind of the contrary. Bishop takes, pawn takes. Yeah, you can go queen d6. You probably want some f4 trickies. Yeah, you could try that. I am actually sort of getting a little annoyed with this idea. Now, chess is a rude game, because I might have an opinion in saying that, oh, chess is all about strategy. But sometimes chess says, it was about strategy. And it was. And it's all been strategy so far.
What if you say, I don't care, you go queen d8?
So I'm subtly hinting that strategy time is over.
Some tricks.
Strategy time is over. No more shuffling.
Okay, knight takes h3 check,
Uh-huh. And pawn takes.
queen check,
Mm-hmm.
takes the knight.
And we take the knight. And so he did take this. Of course, he could also eliminate this first and then just pick it up. And that's just a clear pawn and no compensation. Nothing. Now, and this is what happens in chess. You maneuver, maneuver, maneuver. Whoops, there's a crocodile there. Out of thin air, you're being chased around the block. Same thing here. It came from nowhere. Even in the most tedious position, there are tricks. And they keep popping. So king f1 takes, c takes, knight g5. Again, there's always this temptation of, okay, let's go aggro, but Nodirbek got the pawn, and he's eloping with the loot, going back home. Rook a3, f6, king e2. Now, king e2 is a move that I will just label risky. Obviously, people surrounded by engines and bad vibes would consider king e2 a terrible move. I wouldn't go as far. In fact, it almost did work. Now, because white has a center, white can hope for some play, but I mean, it's still a pawn. It's a lot in chess circles and in chess in general. King e2 actually, and I will actually give props here because it provides a different atmosphere. It changes the character of the game from I'm just going to slowly win the game and you suffer, from we are going to have a big fight and let's see what happens. So king e2, I would actually use the good old tried and tested method of an exclamation and question mark. Interesting idea. And I don't care what your computer says. Your computer is dumb. Doesn't know how humans play chess. I do. So king e2, knight c5, king d1. Now, this feels, wrong. But black's king is on the king's side. White's king is on the other end. You have no attack as black on the queen side. So therefore, it's going to be whoever mates first. So it's actually interesting, and from even in some sense, and this will sound the most ridiculous, what Warmerdam does here is strategically sound. Now his position isn't, but strategically, conceptually, is a correct idea. Rook a8. This has been like the 50th time he's bringing that rook back to the game, but hey, he's up a pawn. Who are we to criticize? King c1, rook d8, knight f7. Now, I like what Nodirbek is doing so far. You're up a pawn. Make sure everything's guarded. And he's doing a fine job with that. All the weak spots, they're covered. f4, e takes, g takes, bam, more pawns. But by now it really doesn't matter. It really isn't going to be about the pawn count. It's going to be about who's going to be faster. So knight f3, rook h5, and this move looks weird, but the position already is weird. One thing that people often forget, that a weird position has weird different rules. It's the same with the King's Gambit. In King's Gambit, gravity works differently. You make a strange move and it obviously is the best. Rook h5, I kind of find it fine because this rook may actually show up there and takes away a potential open file, semi-open file for the rook. So here, e5, doing what he's supposed to do, takes, rook e3, knight d7, oh, f takes, knight takes, rook d1. Now, suddenly there is some pressure, here a Semsevian type of move would have been great for white. King to b1, calmly moving your king while losing 50 pawns, would have actually given a lot of play for white, and it's actually starting to get murky because of all these cross pins along the diagonal and all the way on the board. It's actually getting somewhat less clear, and whenever you start moving those pawns, you always do that with some health advisory there, because your king needs protection. You can't really jump about. You need to have enough defenders on the e pawn. You can't just move your queen away. You need enough defenders. Oh. Rook d1, knight f6, rook back, here, rook d1. Wait a second. So Nodirbek is trying to win? Wow. So that was a repetition, and in fact that's like a sly psychology. They love to use this. It's being used billions of times in chess. They repeat a couple of times just to lull their opponent that, okay, the game is ending, and then just to really just play with their opponent and do just that. Queen c3. Okay. Now white faces knight f6, rook g1. Indeed, Hassan, white actually starts going for this. However, when it comes to calculation, Nodirbek is not too shabby. He's pretty good. So it is a black to move and find all them critical moves. There was a chatter saying, in the Sveshnikov, whenever you capture a piece on d5 with a pawn is bad. That's specifically a Sveshnikov problem. Even there, it's getting less and less clear if that's true. But nevertheless, especially when the positions are more closed, protected pass pawns are much more valuable. Now in a Sicilian, nobody cares about the protected pawn if you're getting checkmated. Same thing here. Nobody cares about being up material and you're getting checkmated. So there's only one prescribed medication for getting checkmated. And that is, don't get checkmated. Checkmate them. Checkmate first. That's correct. Competitive, that is correct. So brave Nodirbek went in and tried what? What's your guess?
I don't have it.
Well, you can't find them if you don't try. You just have to try.
I tried knight g4, but
Uh-huh.
it doesn't work.
Yeah, knight g4, unfortunately, we're brutally pinned here, and they'd capture. If they go here, of course, they capture. You should always start with threats. Or
Knight d5 is the move I want to play, I just haven't worked it out.
knight d5, yes.
Yeah, it's great.
Now, of course, it's hard work. Chess is a lot of calculation. But knight d5, you can't really take here. Your queen is hanging. So white takes on g6. White takes, that's a check.
Oh, okay.
So if they get to be up a queen and live, that's no good.
Right, so I can play king h8.
Yes. Cold-blooded. Dog being cold-blooded. King h8. You have millions of rooks hanging, but what about your lady? So queen d4. Free rook. Takes a rook.
Right, I was trying to figure
Yeah.
out though, is it a big deal though if I lose the queen?
Mm-hmm.
Go back.
Okay, yes. Mm-hmm.
Because I was looking at, bishop takes h5.
Uh-huh. I
knight
take.
takes queen,
Mhm.
and then rook takes e5.
Your issue is that I have a check.
So you have a check. Yes, and
So you don't really have another check,
all right.
and that's a big issue for you because I'm going to mate you. Like, I've got more than enough, and the rook is ready to pounce.
Yeah, yeah.
So like here, push comes to shove, I can also just move my rook,
Right.
and mate is a bound, and you don't even have like a deadly check.
All right, okay. You're faster than me, Dennis. So I
Well,
have to go slow.
no, that's fair. That's fair. All that training with world number 2 helps your calculation.
Okay.
That is an issue.
I was just trying to make sure because
Yeah.
I'm losing both rooks. So
Yeah.
At least the rook.
No, for sure you have to check these. But after consideration, there are not enough checks for that. So here, takes, here, check, here. And now black plays this very, very annoying move. And I honestly assume that he sort of missed this idea. White did. And at first it feels like, oh, I've got a pin. You don't have this rook move here. But now your position collapses like a house of cards because your king is in the wide open. Not the great wide open, by the way, by Tom Petty. It's worse, much worse here.
The void.
The void, yes. And the issue is, once this queen leaves, my rook joins the party, and it's going to be a party, but only for black. And it's just an instantaneous resignation, and that's understandable, because once you leave this, you actually free up my knight. And queen b2, among many millions of other moves, are winning in this position. And my rook is joining the party as well. Like you go here, check, here. And depending on your level of greed, I prefer mate to queens. But all you queen snatchers, this is a queen. That's a queen lost. Therefore, in this position, white resigned.
So
Yes,
was the
questions?
decisive mistake b5 or was white already worse before that?
So white was sort of tending to start much worse, had a slight bit of an advantage. But after b5, it started to tend towards black being fine, slightly better. And then computers still found a way to make it competitive, even though some things were off in White's position. But White never really had more chances than compensation after b5.
Right, but I mean,
Yeah.
after b5, I mean, the position
Yeah.
is easier for black.
Yeah.
You got a square,
Yeah.
and white doesn't.
Yeah, and I would still go as far as that, of course, b5 was an obvious strategic mistake, but I also felt that rook moves and that stutter from e1 to e3 then back, that was too much time lost, while black could sort of reorganize accordingly. And like time is literally money in chess. If you don't have enough time, you flag and you lose. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Very impressive game.
I've never seen a game where you dislikes.